we have already spoken in our my earlier talk. I have already discussed the Aryan invasion theory. I examined the history of the theory as well as the three fields of study in which the arguments have been made for the Aryan invasion theory. That is linguistics, textual evidence, and archaeology. And as we saw, all the arguments in all these three fields of study are totally and absolutely baseless. At the same time, when we are examining the Aryan invasion arguments in each of these three fields, we come across very solid evidence disproving the Aryan invasion theory and proving that the Aryans in India, that is the Vedic Aryans, did not come from outside. Most significant of all is the archaeologists of the West who are studying the Indian situation, archaeological situation. All of them agree that there was no change in the ethnic composition of the people in the Vedic area from 5000 BC to after 1000 BC. Now this is very conclusive evidence against the Aryan invasion theory, because what is the chronology of the split of the Indo-Europeans from their homeland? According to all the linguistic consensus now, the Indo-European people, the Proto-Indo-European people in their homeland, wherever it was situated, were together till 3500 BC at least. And it is after that, between 3500 and 3000 BC, that the 12 branches started separating. Now what is the basis for this chronology? The basis is very simple. Certain technological evolutions took place after 4000 BC. For example, the most important one is the use of wheeled vehicles. Before that, there were no wheeled vehicles in existence anywhere. Now, all the Indo-European branches have common words for wheeled vehicles, which shows that when wheeled vehicles were invented and after they came into use, all the branches were staying together at one spot and had common words for that. If they had separated before, then they would have had different words. They would have coined different words in different areas. So this is a very solid linguistic clue telling us when the Indo-Europeans split, the 12 branches split from their original homeland and went off in different directions. So this split cannot take us back beyond 3500 BC, and it comes up to 3000 BC. Now the Rig Veda, as we saw, they cannot push it further down than 1200 BC, for the simple reason that the Iron Age started around just after 1200 BC. So they have to push the date of the Rig Veda beyond that. They can't push it further, make it later than that date. Now this itself should show that since the Indo-Europeans in their original homeland were there together in 3500 to 3000 BC, and in the Vedic area there has been no change in the composition, no outsiders have come into that area between 5000 and 1000 BC. That shows that the people who were there in 3500 BC in the Indus area were the original Proto-Indo-European. That should be a logical conclusion. But it is not, still not accepted, and there is a reason for it. There are various reasons for it. We should understand what those reasons are. First of all, as I pointed out yesterday, there is a whole school of scholarship, as Erdősi points out, and the accumulated weight of 2 centuries of scholarship which have written on this subject. And all the present scholars who are studying Indology in all the Western universities, they have already written tomes and books, huge volumes on this subject. Now they cannot suddenly backtrack and say, yes, we agree that all that we had written was wrong. So it still continues to be taught. In India, we have political situations, casteist politics, north-south politics, which also forces people to continue this theory. So for all these reasons, the theory is still being taught. But there is another reason. The reason is that Hindus who oppose this theory have never really seriously done any studies on this subject. Now yesterday we spoke on the 3 different fields: linguistics, archaeology, and textual evidence. Now none of those people who oppose this theory have either studied the textual evidence or tried to study the linguistic evidence or gone into serious studies about the archaeology. The only points which Indians have raised up till now, firstly, they point out that the Rig Veda does not talk about immigrations or does not talk about any foreign land. That is a fact. Second, the Saraswati river, which is the central river of the Rig Veda, it had dried up completely by almost completely by 1900 BC, and it is the main river of the Rig Veda. So this is a very central point showing that the Rig Veda goes back beyond 1900 BC. But this is sought to be countered by the Western scholars by saying that the Saraswati of the Rig Veda is not this Saraswati. Some people claim, for example, Griffith in one point says that the Sindhu itself was also known as the Saraswati. Or some people say it is the Haravati of Afghanistan. So you see, they can give counter arguments, however silly those arguments are. They can still refuse to accept this fact that the Saraswati dried up in 1900 BC, that it is referred to in the Rig Veda, and therefore that the Rig Veda is older than 1900. So, but the main thing is that you cannot, just by saying that the Indo-Aryans did not come from outside, you cannot consider the chapter as closed, because there is a very hard linguistic fact that the languages of Europe, Iran, Central Asia and North India are related to each other in 12 branches. All those 12 branches were together till 3500 BC, and after that in around 500 years time they started splitting and separating. So unless you can explain that fact from the Indian homeland point, there is no sense in saying that we have disproved the Aryan invasion theory, because that linguistic situation requires an explanation. Now the fact is that no Indians have bothered to study linguistics. There are certain scholars or writers who simply say linguistics is a pseudoscience. It was invented by the European scholars in order to foist false ideas of Indian history on us. So they just refuse to accept linguistics. Or they claim that Sanskrit is the original language and it is Sanskrit and Hindu people who migrated out of India. So you see, they refuse to study or counter the linguistic this thing. Now, Western scholars have built up a linguistic case for the South Russian homeland. A majority of 80 to 90% of Western scholars support that theory, and a minority of around 10% support the Anatolian theory of for Turkey. So they have built up a linguistic case for the South Russian homeland. They have built up a linguistic case for the Anatolian homeland. Now both these linguistic cases are full of flaws. Most of the linguistic factors do not tally with these theories. They are just swept under the carpet. They pick out of say 100 linguistic factors, they'll pick up 5 or 10 and they try to show that Russia is the original homeland. They ignore the other 90 and no one bothers to ask them, because who will and why? So I have presented in my second and third books a complete linguistic case for the out of India theory, which explains every single linguistic factor absolutely. So this is what has not been done up till now. Once that case is presented and no one is daring to contest it and point out where I am wrong. Now this linguistic case is one absolutely unchallengeable factor for the out of India theory. Now the second is the textual evidence. Now if the Indo-Europeans were together in 3500 to 3000 BC, surely there must be some record of their existence. The earliest records we have of Indo-Europeans are the Hittites and Mitanni in West Asia, who had already mixed with the local populations. We have the Vedic culture, we have the Iranian culture, we have the Greeks, but all of them are separate. They are not Proto-Indo-Europeans. They are Indo-European groups who have already separated from each other and formed different civilizations in different parts of the world. Now the question arises, we have the Egyptian civilization, the Mesopotamian civilization, the Chinese civilization, which have left us records from 4000 BC or more. We know who they were, we know their kings, their identities, their cultural aspects. How is it that the Proto-Indo-Europeans even in 3500 BC had left us no records and no identity, and yet after they separated and went in different directions, they produced civilizations everywhere? This is a very this thing. Of course, it is just an objection we can raise, but it has an explanation. India was the Proto-Indo-European homeland, and we have full textual evidence. These people were not nameless, faceless Proto-Indo-Europeans somewhere in the dark ages of prehistory. They are historical people who lived in India, who are described in the Puranas, whose migrations from out of India are described in the Rig Veda and the Puranas and the Indian texts. And that is the second case that we present, the textual case for the out of India theory. Again, this case by itself is enough to completely prove the out of India theory. The reason why this case has not been taken up is because all Indians like the idea of Vedic and Sanskrit being the original. So when after I have written these 3 books, many people who have read my books, afterwards they say, Srikant Talgeri has proved that the Vedic people took the Sanskrit language and Hindu culture out of India. I have not proved any such thing. What the Indo-Europeans have said, the Western scholars, linguists have said, that the Proto-Indo-Europeans had 12 branches of languages. Of that, one branch is Indo-Aryan, and that Indo-Aryan is Vedic. That is a fact. So the Vedic people were not the ancestors of the Indo-Europeans who went out of India. In the Puranas, we have many tribes and groups of people who are described. Only one of those tribes and people, the Purus, are the Vedic Aryans. The other tribes and people, especially the Anus and the Druhyus who lived to the west, were the people. They were not Vedic people. They were sister civilizations of the sister branches to the Vedic branch. They are the ones who migrated out of India and took all the other languages out. Only the Mitanni people are Purus or Vedic people who went out of India. And later, of course, 1000 years ago, the Gypsies went out of modern India. So people have not bothered. Everyone wants to find evidence from our Vedic and Hindu culture. But that is not the, again, they reject the idea of Proto-Indo-European. Similarly, this idea also does not help them to contest the Aryan invasion theory or to present a proper out of India theory. Now these are the two cases, the textual case and the linguistic case. Both these are cases I will not be touching upon in today's talk. Today I will be touching upon the third case, which I have presented in my third book, and which is absolutely the final evidence. Again, like those two cases also present the unchallengeable evidence, but today I will be talking about the chronology of the Rig Veda. Now, how do you decide the chronology of any civilization in the world? Very simply, there are archaeological things found there. They are dated by carbon dating, and they gave us the date plus minus 200 years or so. So we know that the Sphinx or the pyramids or the Great Wall of China, when they were built thousands of years BC. We know about the Mesopotamian civilization. Clay tablets have been found, inscriptions have been found in readable and decipherable languages. They have been studied, so they know. What is the case in India? We have the Indus Valley civilization, which goes back beyond 3500 BC. And we have written inscriptions there, but they have not been read. They have not been deciphered. Many people claim they have, but I certainly do not know anyone who has. And no one accepts that they have anyway. The earliest decipherable and datable inscriptions we have in India are the Ashoka pillars. And they are just 300 or so BC. Just 2300 years ago, long after the Vedic period. Before that, there is nothing decipherable, readable, and datable. So how do we prove the chronology of the Rig Veda? We can just keep on arguing. There are Indians, for example, who date the Rig Veda lakhs of years ago. They say this was composed in geological times when the earth was different. It was composed lakhs of years ago. Recently, I have read an article by someone in the Itihas Sankalan Samiti of the RSS. They have published an article which says that the Rig Veda was composed lakhs of years ago. Then there are other people who say that Rig Veda is apaurushaya. It is not composed by people. It is an eternal text which has existed since time immemorial. You cannot restrict it to some period of time. So then there are people like Lokmanya Tilak who try to trace the Rig Veda to the Arctic. In my second book, I have examined most of these writers, including Lokmanya Tilak, and have pointed out very frankly the kind of nonsense that has been written on this matter. Because you cannot just date something without any basis, and this is what has been done all the time. So what is the basis for the Rig Veda? Till my second book I had said that you cannot give a specific date for any part of the Rig Veda, because until you find inscriptions somewhere in the Vedic language or referring to some Vedic event, which can be dated scientifically by carbon dating or thermonuclear whatever, and then you know, this is 2000 BC or 2500 BC, then you can date the Rig Veda. But until such something like that is found, you cannot date it. You just have to argue back and forth. That is what I had said. But in the third book now, I have given conclusive linguistic evidence, chronological evidence, which tells us at least the dates for the last parts of the Rig Veda. Now, in India, 300 BC or so, the date of the Ashoka pillars is the earliest readable and datable inscription that we find. Now, before 3rd century BC, we do not have this thing. We have the Rig Veda. Now the Rig Veda is as good as an inscription. Now I will quote what Michael Witzel has said. Note this very carefully. He says, right from the beginning, in Rigvedic times, elaborate steps were taken to ensure the exact reproduction of the words of the ancient poets. As a result, the Rig Veda still has the exact same wording in such distant regions as Kashmir, Kerala and Orissa, and even the long extinct musical accents have been preserved. These words have not changed since the composition of these hymns circa 1500 BCE. They were orally composed and strictly preserved by exact repetition through by-rote learning until today. Not one word, not a syllable, not even a tonal accent were allowed to be changed. That is, when the Rig Veda was composed, it was frozen in that point at certain points of time, so that for thousands of years now people have been reciting the Rig Veda often without knowing the meaning, but without changing even one syllable or one tone. This is the consensus among all scholars because it is a fact. He says we can actually regard present day Rig Veda recitation as a tape recording of what was composed and recited some 3000 years ago. Tape recordings made during the Vedic period and transmitted orally. The modern oral recitation of the Rig Veda is a tape recording of century 1700 to 1200 BC. The Vedic texts are tape recordings of this archaic period. Now these are quotations from different articles by him. The dot dots in the middle show that it's from a different article. He repeatedly calls it a tape recording. Can there be anything more specific than that? Afterwards he says they are equivalent to ancient inscriptions. These texts are equivalent to inscriptions. Like an ancient inscription, the texts are better than any manuscript and as good as any well-preserved contemporary inscription. Finally, he tells us we can rely on the Vedic texts as contemporary sources for names of persons, places, rivers, as snapshots of the particular period and area in which they were composed. These aspects of the Vedas have never been sufficiently stressed. We need to take the texts seriously at their own word. In other words, we do not have inscriptions before the Ashoka period, but we have the Rig Veda, a huge voluminous text, which is as good as an inscription because it has been preserved exactly as it was when it was composed, without any changes taking place. Or whatever additions have been made have been scientifically studied and documented by scholars. Now the Rig Veda has one advantage over other inscriptions. It is much more voluminous and detailed. There are 1028 hymns and 10,552 verses. So we have plenty of material frozen from that period, whereas otherwise you would find small documents or inscriptions in other cases. But what is the disadvantage? See, unlike actual material inscriptions, it is not exactly datable by material methods. If you get a small inscription of even 5 words, you can date it by carbon dating and you can say this belongs to, this inscription belongs to 2000 BC or 2500 BC. The Rig Veda you cannot, because it is orally carried forward. How can you scientifically date it? So Witzel dates it as a tape recording of 1700 to 1200 BC as per his Aryan invasion theory. But while we do not have datable material inside India, we have datable material, inscriptional material outside India. We have it in West Asia. The Mitanni Indo-Aryan data in West Asia. This is very important because it was discovered in the last century in northern Syria and Iraq. Right in the heart of West Asia, there was a kingdom ruled by a dynasty of kings called the Mitanni. Now they are so important that they ruled that land, which was the Mitanni kingdom, for around 150 to 200 years. And they are referred to in the Egyptian records, they referred to in the Mesopotamian records. And you must have heard of the Egyptian queen Nefertiti. She was the daughter of a Mitanni king. That is, she was originally an Aryan, although she was the queen of Egypt. Now, what do you find about these Mitanni inscriptions? You find old Indo-Aryan, that is Vedic words. In the non-Indo-European Hurrite language of the Mitanni realm of northern Iraq, Syria, the kingdom was not an Aryan language speaking kingdom. They were speaking the non-Indo-European language called Hurrite. But the kings who ruled this thing, the Mitanni dynasty which ruled that kingdom, they did not speak also. That is the surprising part, but they all had Vedic names. They had purely Vedic names, and it has been analyzed by all the Western scholars. And it is not something that I am saying, it is an indisputed and accepted fact. Now these loans, and in the other language texts, that is the Hurrite language text, you find the names of these Vedic kings. a large array of personal names adopted by the ruling class, large array of names of the Mitanni kings, which are all Vedic names. Apart from that, you find horses. It is clear that they introduced the chariot in West Asia. So you find all kinds of things connected with horses, like their colors, then horse racing. They talk about, for example, Vartana means rounds of the racing field. How many rounds were taken by the horses in a horse race? All kinds of things are mentioned like that. The colors, horse racing and chariots. Some Vedic gods are mentioned. That is, in one inscription, you find references to Varuna and Indra and the Ashwinis and the Maruts. But the most important thing is the large array of personal names adopted by the ruling class. They are found in datable records all over West Asia and Egypt. So they are dated. Before 300 BC, we don't have any datable material in India. But we have records of Vedic kings in West Asia around 1500 BC. In fact, we have even earlier words. Apart from the Mitanni, there was another class of people in West Asia called the Kassites. Now there, according to Wichtel, he dates them to 1677 BC. Others date them to 1700 BC. The Kassites, also like the Mitanni, they were not speaking an Aryan language. What this means is that their ancestors were speaking Vedic language. And after they went into West Asia, they completely got integrated into the local populations and they adopted the local languages. But out of conservatism, they preserved their names. Now, that is the case of the Mitanni. In the case of the Kassites, who are found 300 years before them, they also were not Indo-European speakers. They were not Indo-Aryan or Vedic speakers. But you find the sun god Suryas and Marut and Bhaga. And you find the name of one single king. You have a whole list of Mitanni kings. You have only one Kassite king, Abhirathas. That is Abhiratha, also a pure Vedic name. And this again is accepted by everyone that they are not Indo-Europeans, but they have this Vedic name. Now these early elements, Indo-Aryan elements in West Asia, that the Mitanni, from whom the Mitanni ruling classes, who must have been their descendants. That is, the Mitanni kings were not speaking Vedic, but their ancestors were speaking Vedic. And they only preserved the names, the personal names. So their ancestors who were speaking these languages obviously must be going back 200, 300 years earlier. And since the Kassites already have that kind of a name, so these Vedic language speaking people were there in West Asia in 1700 BCE, dated by carbon dating methods, accepted by all the Western scholars. Now how does this fit in with the date of the Aryan invasion of India in 1500 BC? If 200 years before that, you already find people with Vedic names in West Asia, how can they say the Aryans invaded India in 1500 BC? So they have been incorporated into the Aryan invasion theory in the following manner. What they claim is that the Indo-Iranians, that is 2 branches out of 12 Indo-European branches, they migrated from South Russia to Central Asia. After that, they split into 2. The Indo-Aryans came into northern Pakistan area called the Sapta Sindhu, and there they composed the Rig Veda. The second group, the Iranians, migrated into Afghanistan, where they composed the Avesta. And that was already the theory. But now they had to add a third component, the Mitanni. They claimed that the Indo-Aryans who were in Central Asia, one branch migrated eastwards into northern Pakistan, and the other branch migrated westwards into West Asia. So that is how, just when the Vedic Rig Veda is being composed in India, according to them, at the same time you find people with Vedic names in West Asia, because they had already separated outside India, in Central Asia. One group going westwards, one group coming eastwards. Therefore, the Mitanni Indo-Aryans are supposed to have separated from the Vedic people in a pre-Rig Vedic period, because the Rig Veda was composed by the Vedic Aryans after they entered in India and settled down in the Sapta Sindhu area. But these people are already found in a date prior to that, so they must have separated from them in a pre-Rig Vedic period outside India in Central Asia. So they represent a pre-Rig Vedic stage of Vedic language. That is the way in which this Mitanni evidence has been incorporated into the Aryan invasion theory. Does this fit in with the Rig Vedic data? Now, I will for a moment talk about chronology. How do you decide chronology? First you have the, as I said, carbon dating and other such methods. But how do you date a text? There is a very simple logic, like when people say the Rig Veda is 5000 or 6000 BC, it cannot be. for the simple reason that they refer to wheeled vehicles, which came into being only after 4000 BC. So they cannot have composed these verses referring to wheeled vehicles before 4000 BC. That's a very simple logical point. Similarly, they do not refer to iron, they are pre-iron age. So they cannot have composed the Rig Veda after 1200 BC. So this is the logic of how you can date a text. I'll give one more example. Suppose now you find a book which is supposed to have been composed 700 years ago. Someone tells you, see, this book has been discovered. It was written 700 years ago, and it is describes how you perform a particular puja and then what kind of food you eat and all that. And then you look in it, and like in Maharashtra, you know, people when they are on fast, they eat sabudana khichdi, which is made of sabudana, groundnuts, chilies, and sabudana, groundnuts, and chilies, and potatoes. Now, suppose this text, which is 700 years ago, is supposed to be describing this sabudana khichdi. That very obviously proves that it was not composed 700 years ago, because all these four ingredients, chilies, potatoes, groundnuts, and sabudana, were brought into India from outside by the Portuguese just 300 years ago. How can a text which is 400 years earlier than that refer to that? Suppose you find that someone prints an article and says this is an article written by Mahatma Gandhi in 1945, and that article refers to mobile phones and laptops. Will you believe that that can have been written by Gandhi in 1945? There is a certain logic by which you can decide that certain things were not written at a certain point of time. So that is the logic. Now there is one more logic, and that is very significant because it fits in here. That is the logic of names. Now I will give an example. In my own Chitrapur Saraswat Brahmin community, I'll give you an example. 200 years ago we had names, or most of our ancestors were settled in Karnataka. So we had names like Ramappaya, Krishnappaya, Nanjundappaya. You see that suffix Appaya was there in all the names. And the names were like Nanjunda and things which Kannada people would also have. So that was the sort of names we had 200 years ago. Around 100 years ago, when my grandfather and was say born or living, they had names like Bhavani Shankar, Ramkrishna, Sitaram, Keshav. A few generations later, you find names like Jayant, Ashok, Kishore, Vasant, Vinod, Pramod. And today, in my community, you will find names like Rohit, Rahul, Abhishek, Vedant, Rigved, all kinds of names like that, which are either picked up from some Sanskrit dictionary, or they are Punjabi type names which they see in serials and films. Rakesh. No one would be named Rakesh in my community at least 100 years ago or 200 years ago. If you find somewhere a reference to Bhavani Shankar Talageri, I will know that he is not someone belonging to today, he is some 100-year-old person. If I find someone claiming to be 100 years ago, whose name is Rohit Talageri, I will know it, he cannot be 100 years ago, he must be now. There is a logic to names because names change with time. Another example is the name Gupta. It's a very common surname in North India. Many people are surnamed Gupta. 17 centuries ago, we had the Gupta dynasty. Chandragupta, Samudragupta. 6 centuries before them, we had the Maurya dynasty with Chandragupta Maurya. And we had the Panchatantra composed in that time, at that time, has Vishnu Gupta, which is supposed to be a name of Chanakya. Now, this Gupta, which has survived 2400 years ago and is still very common, it is not found in the Rig Veda. In fact, the very verbal dhatu gup is one of the late words in the Rig Veda. It only comes at the very end of the Rig Vedic period, and afterwards words start getting formed from this root, verbal root or dhatu. So a name with Gupta in it cannot be a Rig Vedic name. It is very simple and clear logic. And this is the logic by which the Western scholars have analyzed the Rig Vedic. In my very first speech, I had told you about how the Rig Vedic language is different from later Sanskrit. For example, if I ask any of you what is the Sanskrit word for night, you will say Ratri, Ratra. But that is not in the Rig Veda except in the very last part of the Rig Veda. The word is Nakt, which is connected to English night, German Nicht, Latin Noctus. Similarly, if I ask you what is the common word for moon in Sanskrit, you will say Chandra. The word Chandra exists in the Rig Veda meaning shining. It does not mean moon. However, at the last part of the Rig Veda, you get Chandramas. Mas means moon in the Rig Veda. And you get the word Chandramas or shining moon. Later it was shortened to Chandra. in later post-Rigvedic texts. So at that time they did not use the word Chandra for moon. So words change, and Western scholars have very correctly identified the late parts of the Rig Veda on the basis of linguistic change within the Rigvedic hymns. On that basis, they have concluded that the family books, that is one of the bases. There are many bases on the which they have reached this conclusion, and there is a consensus among Western scholars, right from Oldenburg to Witzel to Proferis, who is the latest writer who is analyzing the chronology of the Rig Veda. All of them agree that books 2 to 7 of the Rig Veda, this is a very central point, 2 to 7 of the Rig Veda are the family books, which are the older books, and books 1, 8, 9, 10 are the new books of the Rig Veda. At the same time, from books 2 to 7, book 5 is not as old as 2, 3, 4, 6 and 7. It can be put together with 1, 8, 9, 10. So you get very clearly two groups of books in the Rig Veda, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7. Now, as I said, we have two very significant factors here which will help us in dating the Rig Veda. The first is, as I said, the Mitanni evidence, which has been scientifically dated by carbon dating methods and are accepted as a consensus by all Western scholars that they represent Vedic names, and they are dated to 1500 BC, and in the case of the Kassites 1700 BC. And the second factor is the division of the Rig Veda into old and new books. This also is as per a consensus among the Western scholars, for example, Oldenburg, Witzel and Proferis at the moment, who represent the main people who have written on this point. Therefore, as I said, there are two factors which we will take into consideration for dating the Rig Veda. Beyond the Ashoka pillars, we don't have anything in India which is datable, but we have the Mitanni records of West Asia, which are dated to around 1500 BC. Before that, we have the Kassites, which are also dated by Western scholars to 1700 BC. And the second factor is the Rig Veda. Now, this is accepted by scholars as having been preserved exactly in the form in which it was composed. And they have divided the Rig Veda into two groups of books. Books 2 to 7 are the family books, and 1, 8, 9, 10 are the non-family books. Now, it is accepted by all of them that books 2 to 7 are older than books 1, 8, 9, 10. And from books 2 to 7, book 5 is later than all the other family books, and it shows in fact greater affinity with the non-family books. So it represents clearly a later period than the other family books. So you have two groups of books, the old books 2, 3, 4, 6, 7 and the new books 1, 5, 8, 9, 10. So now to compare from these two factors that we have, the Mitanni evidence and the Rig Veda, we can arrive at a comparative chronology of the Rig Veda. Now, as per the Aryan invasion theory, the Mitanni and the Vedic Aryans separated from each other in Central Asia. Then the Vedic Aryans came to northwestern India and they composed the Rig Veda, while the Mitanni people went to West Asia, and as a result we have all these Mitanni inscriptions and references in West Asia. So the Mitanni inscriptions and the Rig Veda represent two totally different things, and they are both derived from a pre-Rig Vedic stage of common Indo-Aryan. That is the theory. Now, what is the Mitanni data? As I said, the Mitanni kings and the Mitanni people were not speaking Indo-Aryan languages. They were not speaking Vedic or Sanskrit or any other Indo-Aryan language. They were speaking a non-Indo-European language called Hurrite. But they had preserved their ancestral names. And what is the data we get which shows that their ancestors were Indo-Aryans or Vedic people? Firstly, a few numerals like Eka for 1, Tera for 3, Panza for 5, Satta for 7. Then we have the names of a few Vedic gods, Varuna, Indra, Mitra, etc. And a Sanskrit word for bead, Mani, Mani or bead. And a large array of personal names adopted by the ruling class, which is the main thing. As I said, we will be analyzing the names in the Mitanni data. Now, the kind of personal names current in any period of history are chronological markers for that particular historical period. I have already explained how names change with the passage of time. And by names you can identify that certain names do not belong to one period, but they belong to another period. Now, Mani, we will take, now the Mani is a late word in the Rig Veda. It is found in post-Rig Vedic texts. It is found in the Atharva Veda. It is found in all other texts, and we use it today also, Mani for bead. But in the Rig Veda, it is found only in 2 hymns. In the later part of the new book 1, it is not found in any of the old mandalas. But of course, we cannot go by one word. Now, as I said, how have the Western people analyzed the Rig Veda? They took one word, Anas, which was found in the Rig Veda somewhere. It is not found anywhere after the Rig Veda. It is found only once in all its existence in the Rig Veda, where the Rigvedic composer refers to his enemies as Anas. These people decided Anas meant noseless or Nas, although it actually meant Anas, that is, who do not speak clearly. But the Western scholars translated it as noseless. After that, they translated, what do you mean noseless? Someone has to have a nose, so it must be meaning snub-nosed or flat-nosed. So then, that means that the enemies of the Vedic Aryans, the pre-Aryans of India, had flat noses. So that became a part of Aryan theory. So you see, one word distorted, misinterpreted, mistranslated, and then adopted, a whole historical story is made out of it. However, so we will not, although Mani clearly shows that this is a late Vedic word, it is not found in the early books, but we cannot go by one word, we will have to go by the personal names. Now, the Mitanni names contain the following Vedic type of names. Firstly, in the Rig Veda, you find names ending in the word Atithi. You find Mitratithi, Devatithi, etc. Here you find, among the Mitanni kings, you find the names Biryati, Mittaratti, Asuratti, Mariatti, Suryati, Devatti, Indaratti, Paratti, and Suatti. That Atti stands for Atithi. You find names in Ashwa, ending in Ashwa, like Biryasua, Bhartasua, and Biridaswa. You find names ending in Ratha, Tusrata, and the Kassite name Abhiratash is also Abhiratha, as I said. It is a name ending in Ratha, so it is also found in 1700 BC in West Asia. Names ending in Medha, that is Birya Masda. Names ending in Sena, like Birya Sena. Names ending in Bandhu, like Subandhu. Names ending in Uta, like Indarota and Yamiyuta. Names beginning with Vasu, like Vasdata and Vaskani. And names beginning with Rita, Artha Sumara, Arthatama, Arthamna. And names beginning with Priya, Birya, Birya Suma, Birya Sura, Birya Vaza, and of course above in the earlier list also you see names beginning with Birya. This is the complete list of Indo-Aryan names that you find in the Mitanni kings. Now these are the names you find among the Mitanni kings. Now where do you find these names in the Rig Veda? You see, in the 5 old books, you find only one name, 430.18, in that hymn, that verse, book 4, hymn 30 and verse 18. That is the only place in the old books that you find a name of this kind. In the 5 new books, see 5, 1, 8, 9, 10. All the 5 books have names belonging to this Mitanni type. Now the only reference in the old books is in a hymn 4.30, which is classified by Oldenburg as a late addition in the old book 4. So which means that even that is not in the old books actually, it was added to the old books at the time of composition and addition of the new books. Which means that in the old books, you don't find a single name of the Mitanni type within the hymns. Whereas in the new books, you find plenty of names in all the books. This is within the hymns. Now, among the composers of the hymns, again, in the 5 old books, you do not find a single composer with a name of the Mitanni type. But in the 5 new books, you find, in book 5 there are 20 hymns, book 1 there are 13 hymns, book 8 there are 24 hymns, book 9 there are 9 hymns, and book 10 there are 23 hymns. So again, not a single hymn in the old books has a composer with a name with these prefixes or suffixes. In other words, names of this kind did not exist in the Rig Veda at the time of the composition of the old books of the Rig Veda. They only came into being at the time of composition of the new books. Because you see, this is without exception. There is no exception at all. As we saw, within the hymns it appears only once, that is in an interpolated hymn as per Oldenburg. Witzel, when I had written my second book, he told me Talgeri has not read Oldenburg, so he does not know how to analyze the Rig Veda. Now here it is his idol, the one whom he claims I should be referring to. He has classified this hymn as a late one or an addition in the old books. And among the composers, you find not a single one in the old books. Now, as per the Aryan invasion theory, the Indo-Vedic people and the Mitanni separated in Central Asia and they went in 2 different directions. But they were not the only two to separate. There was a third group, the Iranians, who were also supposed to be in Central Asia with them, who also separated at the same point of time and went into Afghanistan, where they composed the Avesta. So now you have the Rigveda, the Avesta, and the Mitanni inscriptions. Three sources, three distinct different sources in three areas for these names. Now, let us examine the names in the Avesta, just as we have examined the names in the Mitanni inscriptions. Now, Avesta material is much more vast and detailed than the Mitanni data, because as we saw, the Mitanni people were not speaking any Vedic or Indo-European language. They had only preserved some of their names. Whereas the Avesta is a full-fledged Iranian text containing plenty of material. So we get much more material in the Avesta than we get in the Mitanni inscriptions. Now, there are only 5 name types with prefixes found in the Rigveda throughout the different periods, right from the earlier old books to the later new books. Only 5 types of prefix names are found. They are Su, names beginning with Su, that is good. Deva or Diva, that is divine. Puru, that is many. Vishwa, that is all or every. And Pra, that is forward. Only these 5 types of names are found throughout the Rigveda. Therefore, these are chronologically neutral. You cannot decide whether they are old names or new names, because they have existed throughout. There are 2 name types which are found only in the old books. They are names ending in Hotra and names ending in Mira. Now, these are not found in the new books. One of these names, Ajamira, is still used later, but it is the name of that same person. No new name has been coined with this kind of suffix, Hotra. Now, these suffixes are not used in any new name in the new books or in any post-Rigvedic text. Similarly, these names are not found in the Avesta either. So, these are definitely old names of the old period. Now, in addition to these, there are large number of very important names and name types common to the Rigveda and Avesta. Now, let us see what these types are. They are common Rigvedic Avestan names and name types with common prefixes and suffixes other than these 5 which I have named, which are found throughout the Rigveda. Except for those 5, you find a very large list of common suffixes and common prefixes in Rigvedic names and Avestan names. You find Proto-Iranian names of patron kings in the Rigveda as per the Western scholars. That is, in the Rigveda they have found a few names which they have identified as Proto-Iranian or before the Avesta. Then there are animal names which are used as names or as prefixes or suffixes in names in the Avesta. For example, in the Rigveda you find names with Ashva, but in the Avesta you find names of other animals used in prefixes and suffixes. For example, Zarathustra, Ustra or the camel is in the name of the prophet who composed the earliest part of the Avesta. Now they are found only as animal names in the Rigveda, not in names. Then there are names in the Avesta which are found only as words in the Rigveda. Then there are names in the Rigveda which are found only as words in the Avesta. And there are prefixes and suffixes in Rigvedic Avestan names which are found not only in names but in ordinary words, not necessarily names. And they are found in the Rigveda only in certain parts of the Rigveda. Now let us examine the distribution of all the above words in the Rigveda, which is a comparison of the Rigvedic and Avestan names. Now, these are the names of composers of hymns in the Rigveda, which are common to the Rigveda and the Avesta. In the 5 old books, you find only one hymn, 3.36. In the 5 new books, there is a list of hymns which have names with these composers with these kind of names. There are 40 hymns in book 5, 61 hymns in book 1, 51 hymns in book 8, 61 hymns in book 9, and 91 hymns in book 10. So as we saw from the database of common names in the Mitanni and the Rigveda, all the names are found in the Rigveda. Only in the new books, the only one composer name that is found, Mitanni type name, is found in the old book, is a hymn which has been classified by Oldenburg as an interpolated hymn. Now what we did in the case of the Mitanni database of names, when we do the same thing to the Avestan and Rigvedic common database of names, we find the same picture repeated again on a much larger scale. For example, this is the distribution of these words in the names of composers of hymns in the Rigveda, the Avestan and Rigvedic common names I'm telling. In the 5 old books, you find only one hymn, 3.36. That is 3 verses out of 18 in this hymn, the last 3 verses. And in the 5 new books, in book 5 you find 40 hymns, in book 1 you find 61 hymns, in book 8 you find 51 hymns, in book 9 61, and in book 10 91 hymns. Out of a total of 1028 hymns in the whole of the Rig Veda, these are the amount of hymns, more than 300, all found only in the new books, where you find these Avestan type names in the names of composers. And the only hymn 3.36 is classified in the Aitareya Brahmana as a late addition in the old book 3. Now, as I said, we have the family books and the non-family books, and the family books are older than the non-family books. But in the family books, the Aitareya Brahmana, which is a text connected with the Rig Veda, it classifies 6 hymns in book 3, Vishwamitra's Mandala. These 6 hymns are mentioned there as being later additions. They were not there in the original Rig Veda of the family books. The original Rig Veda consisted of books, the present day books 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. In that, these 6 hymns were not there. Afterwards, when books 1 and 8 were added to the collection, later book 9 and later book 10 were also added. But when books 1 and 8 were being added to the collection, that time these 6 hymns were added into book 3 for a particular reason, which is mentioned in the Aitareya Brahmana. Now, these are also therefore late hymns which were composed at the time of books 1 and 8. Now, apart from these 6 hymns, the order of arrangement of hymns in the old books, which has been studied in detail by Oldenburg and other Western scholars, they have also picked out a few handful of hymns which are treated as later additions or later modified hymns which were added in those old books. As we saw in the case of the Mitanni data, the only hymn which has a composer with a Mitanni type name is in one of those books, which has hymns which has been identified by Oldenburg as later or interpolated. Now, here also, the only hymn which has a composer with an Avestan type name is in a hymn which is classified by the Aitareya Brahmana as a late addition. This is the names of the composers. Now, we'll see the names of the rishis as they appear, or kings, as they appear within the hymns of the Rig Veda. Now, in the 5 old books, you find in book 6, there are 4 verses. Book 3, there are 2. Book 7, there are 3, all in one hymn. And book 4, there is 1. In the 5 old books. Now, compare these meager references, every single one of which is in a hymn classified either by the Aitareya Brahmana or by Oldenburg as late additions. That is, 6.18 is classified by the Aitareya Brahmana, hymn 3.38 is classified by the Aitareya Brahmana as an interpolation or a late addition, and all the other hymns are classified by Oldenburg, which means again that the old books do not contain a single name within, either in the names of the composers or within the hymns belonging to the Avestan type. But compare it with the 5 new books. Now, in book 5, you find all these references. Now, book 5c is a family book like the other 5 books. But here, in all these references, you see how it completely stands apart from the other family books and falls in the same category as the non-family books, which are late. So, see the number of references in book 5. These are the number of references in book 1. These are the number of references in book 8. These are the number of references in book 9 and 10. So, you can just see these few meager references in the 5 old books, each of which is classified as interpolated, does not belong to the old books in their original form. And in the new books, you find this vast sea of references. Now, remember, all this is absolute evidence. You know, I have not taken one word from the Rig Veda and built up stories from it. This is a complete analysis of the database of names in the 3 available sources, Rig Veda, Avesta and Mitanni. And this is the consistent picture that you get. This classification into old and new books is also done by the Western scholars. I have shown within the old books that book 6 is the oldest, 3 comes after that, then 7, and then 4 and 2. Now, Witzel has completely rejected my classification. He says this is not right. So, let us not go into that. We'll still take only the Western classification. All these 5 old books will count as one block and all the new books as one block. Still, this is the picture you get. Now, the evidence is very clear. There is a huge flood of names common to the Rig Veda, the Avesta and the Mitanni records, all the 3 databases. and all of them show every single one of them is found only in the new books, and the only few references you find have been classified as late additions in these books. Now let's take two more additional words in the Rig Veda which are not found in names. They're just words, but they're very important words. Gatha and Bija. Gatha is important because it means, we all know the word Gatha for song or story. The oldest part of the Avesta is composed by Zarathustra, and it is called the Gatha. So the Gatha is a word very central to the Avesta, and all the rest of the Avesta comes after the Gathas. The 5 Gathas composed by Zarathustra, which is the oldest part of the Avesta. Now, Bija is also very important because according to Zarathustra in the Gathas, their ancestors lived in a place called Aryana Veja. Veja is Bija or seed. Bija. These two words are very central to the Avesta. Now, where do you find them in the Rig Veda? In the 5 old books, none. In the 5 new books, again you find them in all the 5 books. You see, it's a very consistent picture. It's an absolute picture. That is, there is not one single exception. I'm not saying here there are 2 names and here there are 10, or here there are 40 names and there are 400. It is complete 0 against 100%, the distribution of names. It is absolute. And no one can challenge this is the data from these 3 databases. Unless you invent a new Rig Veda, a new Avesta and new Mitanni records, this is the only data that you will come up with when you analyze the data. Now the oldest part of the Avesta is the Gatha composed by Zarathustra, which is older than the rest. Now Zarathustra was the first composer of the Avesta because he composed the 5 Gathas which are the oldest part of the Avesta. Now the new culture of the new books of the Rig Veda contains words and name types crucial to the period of this first composer of the Avesta. Zarathustra's father, his brother, his ancestor, his enemy, and the king who was his patron, all of them have names ending in Aspa or Ashva. Ashva, Zarathustra's father, Paurushaspa, Haichataspa, Dhammajaspa, Vishtaspa, you must have heard, is the king in whose court Zarathustra was the priest. Arjataspa is supposed to be the one who killed Zarathustra in the end. All these people have names ending in Aspa, which, as I said, is Ashva, found only in the new books of the Rig Veda. Gatha, the Gatha is the oldest part. Bija, Aryana Veja. Yama, we all know Yama as the god of death. In the Avesta, he is their ancestral person, as Manu is the ancestral person in our Puranas. Now, Yama is so common in the Rig Veda, his name appears hundreds of times, but all of them are only in the late books. Not a single reference appears in the old books. Now, if further evidence is required after this flood of evidence, let's see the names of 4 individuals who are also named in the Avesta and in the Rig Veda. And they are individuals, it's just not just name types. In the Avesta, they are referred to as people who lived before the period of Zarathustra. And in the Rig Veda, they are found in the middle books. Now here I have gone from the Western classification to mine, where 6, 3 and 7 are old books and 4 and 2 are middle books. In the 3 earlier old books, that is 6, 3 and 7, they are not found at all, these names. In the later 2 old books, 4 and 2, you find them there as contemporary living people. Whereas in the Avesta, they are people who lived in the time of Zarathustra's ancestors. And Zarathustra is the first composer of the Avesta. So they are pre-Avestan names. You find them in the later 2 old books, and in all the 5 new books, you find these names so many times. You don't find them in the 3 earlier books. Now finally, to round off this evidence, we'll see the evidence of the meters. Now, you know, the Rigvedic hymns are composed in certain meters. We know the Gayatri mantra. Actually, it is called the Gayatri mantra. It is just one verse from book 3, composed by Vishwamitra. We call it the Gayatri mantra because it is in the meter known as Gayatri, which contains 3 lines of 8 syllables each. That is the way the meters were used in the Rigveda and the Avesta. You find the Gayatri, the Anushtubh, which has 4 lines of 8. These 2 meters are used throughout the Rigveda. But then you find Pankti in the same order, which has 5 lines of 8 syllables. Here is where you find them in the Rigveda. you find the Pankti meter in the 5 old books, you find it only in one hymn in the 5 old books, 6.75, and that too in one verse only, 0.17. In the 5 new books, again, you find them in 49 verses in book 5, 57 verses in book 1, 24 in book 8, 19 in book 9, and 29 in book 10. The only verse in the 5 old books, 675.17, is in a hymn classified by Oldenburg as a late addition in the old book 6. You see, that picture is consistent. There is no break in this evidence. It is absolute evidence. Now the next two in line, Mahapankti and Diameter Shakvari, that is, they consist of 6 lines of 8 and 7 lines of 8. They are found in the Rig Veda as follows. They come after Pankti, which I have already pointed out. They are in the 5 old books, they are not found at all. In the one earlier new book, that is book 5, the last of the family books, it is not found at all. These 2 meters are found only in the 4 later new books. Now here we see a clear chronological evolution of these meters. First you have the Gayatri and the Anushtup, which are found throughout the Rig Veda. Then you find the Pankti, which is in the late books, but it is also in book 5. And then you find Mahapankti and Diameter Shakvari, which are found only in the new books, but not in book 5 also. Now in the Gathas, 5 Gathas are composed by Zarathustra. 2 of them are in meters which are the Mahapankti. So in meters which are found only in the non-family books of the Rig Veda, you find the 2 of the earliest hymns of the Avesta. Now there is this common culture of the Rig Veda, the Avesta and the Mitanni people. This, according to the Aryan invasion theory, where did this common culture develop? It developed in Central Asia, when the Rigvedic Aryans and the Iranians were together, and also the Mitanni people, who were a section of the Vedic Aryans. After that, from Central Asia, after that they were not in contact with each other. They split in 3 different directions. The Vedic Aryans came to northern Pakistan and Haryana area. The Iranians went to Afghanistan, and the Mitanni Indo-Aryans moved westwards into West Asia. It was after they went into these 3 areas that they started composition of the Rig Veda, the Avesta, and whatever Mitanni names we find in the West, they are also after that period. Now, this culture should therefore be found in the oldest books of the Rig Veda, because this common culture is the culture of Central Asia. After it split from them, it was never in contact with the Iranians or the Mitannis. They came into India, settled down in the northwest, they composed the Rig Veda. So this culture of names should be found in the old books. In the new books, then this culture should become less and less, because names change with the passage of time, and in the post-Rigvedic literature it should be even less. But what do we find? We find these names are found only in the new books of the Rig Veda. As you saw, it's not just 1 or 2, it's a flood of names, which you find only in the new books of the Rig Veda, and in some isolated, interpolated hymns in the old books. After that, you find them in all the post-Rigvedic Sanskrit texts. You find them in the Samaveda, Yajurveda, Atharva Veda, the Brahmanas, the Aranyakas, the Upanishads, the Sutras. After that, you find them in classical Sanskrit texts. You find them in all the Ramayana, Mahabharata, Puranas. You find names of these types everywhere. And the names are such common types. Names ending in Ashva and Ratha, for example. Names like Krishna and Buddha, for example. And names ending in Ayana, which are so important. In the Rig Veda, you find names ending in Ayana. Only in the last parts of the Rig Veda, you find them in the Avesta. It includes, after the Rig Veda, you find it's so common that almost every, you find Bauddhayana, you find Badrayana, who composed the Vedanta Sutras. In almost of the Sutras have authors who have Ayana in their name. So you see, these are not uncommon name types. They are very common name types in the new books and in all post-Rigvedic literature. But the old books of the Rig Veda alone stand isolated from this common new culture of names. This common new culture of names is found in the new books, in all post-Rigvedic literature, in the Avesta and in the Mitanni data. From all this collective data material, the old books of the Rig Veda alone stand isolated from this culture. What it means is that the common Rigvedic, Avestan and Mitanni culture is therefore a culture which developed well after the period of composition of the old books. It is not pre-Rigvedic, it is new Rigvedic. That is, it belongs to the second half of the Rigveda, not to the pre-Rigvedic section. Now, and it is derived from the culture of the, it's not that like you have in the Bible you have the Old Testament, which is the book of the Jews. Afterwards you have the New Testament, which was the book of Christians. It was supposed to be a continuation from that, but it came from a different source, because it is found in Greek, whereas the Old Testament was originally found in Hebrew. The Christian Bible has the Old Testament translated into Greek along with the New Testament, which is originally in Greek alone. So it is a new text, but it is formed in a continuity with the Old Testament. Here there is not even that. It is not that the new books are composed by other people who came afterwards. It is a continuation of the culture of the old books, but now it has developed new forms. So it developed after the composition of the old books and in continuation of that culture. Now this has very crucial implications for the geography and the absolute chronology of the Indo-Iranians. Note the geographical implications. In yesterday's talk, I showed you what is the geography of the Rigveda. Not from west to east, as they say, it is from east to west. And in the oldest books, as you saw, in the early period, in the very first book of the Rigveda, book 6, they are located to the east of the Saraswati. That is in Haryana, western Uttar Pradesh and western Uttarakhand. Even the area of northern Pakistan is not their territory, not the territory of the Vedic Aryans, who are the Purus. It is only during the other period of the later period of the old books, 3 and 7, that they expand into the Punjab from the east. And it is after that, in the period of the new books, that they have extended their geographical horizon up to southern and eastern Afghanistan. So what does this mean? This common culture of the new books of the Rigveda and of the Avesta and the Mitanni developed after and from and as a continuation of the culture of the old books of the Rigveda, whose geographical area lay within India to the east of the Saraswati. That is, the common culture which they say was formed in Central Asia was formed in this area between Haryana and southern Afghanistan. And before that, you should, according to the Aryan invasion theory, where should the pre-Rigvedic culture be found? Where should the culture which is before this common culture, where should it be found? It should be found on the trail from South Russia to Central Asia, because this common culture, according to them, was formed in Central Asia, and before that they came from South Russia. But it is the opposite. This common culture is found in the area from Haryana to southern Afghanistan, and the previous geography of the old books is within India to the east of the Saraswati. So that means the Proto-Iranians and the Mitanni Indo-Aryans were descendants of people who migrated from within India at a point of time in or after the period of composition of the new books of the Rigveda. Now the implications of all this for the absolute chronology of the Rigveda is even more devastating. See, the Mitanni kingdom existed from around 1500 BC or so. Before that, you find around 1700 BC, you find the Kassites, who also have this same kind of names and culture. So that means the original Mitanni Indo-Aryans who influenced the Kassites were present in West Asia well before 1700 BC. Because see, this is what they say. For example, there are elements or the elements, Vedic elements that you find in the Kassite and Mitanni data, they are residue of a dead language. It was not a living language, the Vedic language, among the Mitanni and Kassites. It was already an ancestral language which they had abandoned long before. So that means the original Mitanni Indo-Aryans who left India and went to West Asia and who actually spoke Vedic Sanskrit at that time, they existed well before 1700 BC. Now these people had migrated from India before 1700 BC. So they must have left at a very minimum estimate, at least 200-300 years before. They must have left India around 2000 BC. after the composition of the old books and during the time of composition, or maybe even after the time of composition of the new books. We don't know whether it was during the composition or after the composition of the new books. Therefore, the new books of the Rig Veda were composed before 2000 BC, because when the Mitanni were leaving India and they took this culture with them, that culture was already formed in Northwest India. It was already a living culture which was fully developed with all these name types. And this culture was taken by the Mitanni and the Proto-Iranians out of India before 2000 BC. Now this common culture of the new books must have taken at least a few centuries to develop. It didn't develop in a day. All these new name types and new cultural elements did not originate in one day. So how far back do they go from 2000 BC? When did the culture of the new books, which the Iranians and the Mitanni took out of India, when did that culture start? How far back can we go from 2000 BC? Is it 2200, 2400, 2600 or more? Now we will have to enter in the realm of speculation, because now we don't have datable material. One thing is certain, that it definitely goes back deep into the 3rd millennium BC, say 2500 or so, or more. And we have two more chronological markers independent of the Mitanni evidence which also confirm this. Now, I already told you about the Iron Age. I told you about the wheeled vehicles. But now wheeled vehicles are also of two types. First, there were the wheeled vehicles which just had a round block of wood which functioned as a wheel. So the carts used to go chopping along slowly. Afterwards, they developed the spoked wheels. That is, inside the circle there used to be those spokes which made the wheels move much faster than the block wheels. That is, they started moving umpteen times faster than and that revolutionized transport. Spoked wheel chariots. Now, where did spoked wheels, again archaeologically, when did spoked wheels originate? They originated in around Central Asia in the second half of the 3rd millennium BC. That is, after 2500 BC, the spoked wheels originated. At the same time, another marker is the camel. The Bactrian camel was domesticated in Central Asia in the late 3rd millennium BC, as Witzel points out. Now, where in the Rig Veda do you find references to camels and spokes? Again, you see 5, 1, 8 and 10, which means the old books of the Rig Veda, the 5 old books of the Rig Veda do not know spokes, they do not know the domesticated camel. So the old books of the Rig Veda clearly belong to a period earlier to the invention of spokes and earlier to the domestication of the camel. And the second half of the 3rd millennium BC, means after 2500, is the period of the new books of the Rig Veda. So the culture of the new books 5, 1, 8, 9, 10 was the culture of the second half of the 3rd millennium BC. Before this culture, we have the culture of the later old books 4, 2. Before that, we have the culture of the earlier old books 6, 3, 7, each with its own duration in numbers of centuries. Obviously, those cultures did not originate in 1 year or 10 years. They must have taken 1 or 2 or 3 centuries to develop each. Therefore, even taking the minimum duration for each of the different earlier parts of the Rigvedic period, see, the new period is testified by all these archaeological factors, the Mitanni records, the camels and spokes. So we know that the new books, based on all these archaeological chronological markers, we know that it extended beyond 2300 BC. And before that came these middle books and the earlier books. So they go even further back. Again, how much further back? Again, like Max Muller, let's take the minimum duration of 200 or 300 years. Even then, you come to the very early 3rd or the late 4th millennium BC for the old books. See, this is very systematic and logical. There is nothing that can be challenged, because so far as the new period, chronology of the new period is concerned, it is absolute that it comes somewhere 2400 BC or so. And before that, it only depends on how much duration you want to give to the earlier periods, but they are definitely before that. And what is the character of these old books? In the old books, the Vedic Aryans were inhabitants of areas in the interior of India to the east of the Saraswati, with no prior acquaintance with areas to the west, into which they expanded later. Before 2400 BC, they had no acquaintance with areas to the west of the Saraswati. They were living in an area to the east in Haryana. The Rig Veda has no knowledge of any areas to the west. The Vedic people have no acquaintance with anything or anyone non-Indo-European. I have shown that yesterday. Even according to their theory, they have to find names of non-Aryan people, whether they are Dravidian, Munda, or some language X. But none of them are found in the Rig Veda, even in the oldest books. Means at a point of time well before 2400 or 2500 BC, even at that point of time, there are no non-Indo-Europeans named in the Rig Veda. And finally, the river and place names in the Indus area are purely Indo-European in the old books of the Rig Veda before 2500 BC. As I pointed out, in other areas where Indo-Europeans have included, even after 3000, 4000 years of them settling there, even after the fact that we don't have exact knowledge of which languages were spoken there before, still the river names of those areas are pre-Aryan, pre-Indo-European, even after 3000 years. Whereas here, in 3000 BC and before, the river names in the northwest are purely Rigvedic or Indo-European. Therefore, at a minimum estimate, the joint Indo-Iranians were full-fledged and exclusive inhabitants of the Rigvedic area, exclusive meaning no other language family, whether Dravidian, Munda or language X or whatever, was spoken in that area, as far back as the late 4th and the 3rd early millennium BC. So note the two absolutely devastating implications of this. First is the Indus civilization, now more properly referred to as the Sindhu-Saraswati civilization, which occupies the same area as the geographical area of the Rig Veda in the same period. It was an Indo-Iranian civilization. It was a civilization of the old Rigvedic period. Secondly, as Witzel points out, where were the Indo-Europeans, the Proto-Indo-Europeans in 3500 BC or so? They were all in the Proto-Indo-European homeland and started splitting after that. So, at that time they were in the Indus Valley civilization or the Harappan areas. And this shows that the Indo-European branches migrated out from India around after 3500 BC. This is the basic conclusion that we derive from this, from a complete study of the database of words, names in the Rig Veda, the Avesta and the Mitanni. And there is not a single word which provides an exception to this. Now the whole of Rigvedic studies to this date have been conducted on the basis of linguistic studies which have established the old parts and the new parts by Western scholars. It is only some Indians who have said, no, the Rig Veda is eternal, you cannot date it, the whole of Rig Veda is eternal and all that. But the Western scholars have classified them and given us the chronology, internal chronology of the Rig Veda, the old books and the new books. And this is what the old books and the new books show us. This is what the Mitanni evidence, which has been dated by the Western scholars, shows us. And this is what the complete database of these three sources, Rigvedic, Avestan and Mitanni, this is what it shows us. It shows us that the Indus civilization was Indo-Iranian and that that was the Proto-Indo-European homeland from which the other branches went out. Now this, as I said, for the next stage, if they went out, where is all this described? It is described, as I said, in the Rig Veda and the Puranas. Now this by itself, without reference to the recorded data, this itself proves that India was the original homeland and that all the other branches migrated out of India. This is one of the three groups of evidence. The second is the textual evidence. Even that evidence just by itself, even if you ignore this evidence, that just by itself shows that India was the original homeland. And thirdly, we have the linguistic case for the Indian out of India theory, which explains all the linguistic factors. All the linguistic factors can be accommodated in that theory, while most of them cannot be accommodated in the Russian homeland theory or the Anatolian homeland theory, and they have to be swept under the carpet. So that constitutes the third school of evidence. Each of them in itself is sufficient to prove that India was the original homeland of the Aryans, and of course in combination, no one can challenge the thing. All the three evidences put together present an absolutely unchallengeable case. Now this is what I have presented today based on the data, the methods of analysis of Western scholars. I challenge anyone, any Western scholar to show that the data I have given, the verse numbers, the hymn numbers, all these things, that I have given some wrong data, I have not given the full data, I have done some kind of mischief. No one, they cannot challenge. I challenge anyone to provide alternative data which shows a different picture. No one can do it. So Witzel has refused to even look at this evidence. He says, no, I don't want to comment on his new book. Then Konrad Elstedt sent my book to a friend of his or an acquaintance of his named Arnold Fornet for reviewing. Now Arnold Fornet, he told me, is a person with a unconventional this thing. So he's maybe receptive to new ideas. Now the Arnold Fornet, of course, was extremely this thing. He, within 4 days of receiving the book, he had already completed a review and uploaded it on the internet, in which he simply abused and made fun of me. He didn't see any of the data. He admitted, I don't know anything about Vedic history, I don't know anything about Indo-Iranian. He doesn't know anything about half these things. He's never heard of the Dasharajna battle, he's never heard of Sudas, and yet on within 4 days he had already completed and uploaded a review of my book, in which he has criticized it on various grounds, my language, my style of writing, even the smell and color of the book. It reminds him of some book that he saw in the bazaar in China, in China. Now, what can one say of this kind of, as I said, no serious scholar will be able to challenge the evidence I have produced today. And there I rest my case.